The ritual was supposed to last 20 minutes. Illyra had attended 17 of them, arranging the sacred flowers, trimming the ceremonial candles, staying invisible the way half-bloods learn to stay invisible in packs that only tolerated them. She was good at disappearing into the background of other people's important moments. She did not expect to become one. It happened in the space of 4 seconds. She felt it before she understood it, a cold presence at her back, breath near her neck, and then lips. Deliberate, precise, gone before she could turn around. By the time she looked, Alpha Ciro Ashvale was already standing at the altar beside Selka, his chosen mate, looking at the crowd with that carved stone expression that never cracked for anyone. He did not look at Illyra. He did not need to. Because in those 4 seconds, while an entire pack watched his chosen mate receive her ceremonial wreath, he had pressed his mouth to the back of Illyra's neck and done something that hadn't been done in 300 years. He had marked her. And 3 weeks later, when her body began to change in ways that had nothing to do with the full moon, Illyra would understand exactly what he had stolen from her, along with something else, something that was already growing, already breathing, already his. Chapter 1. The candles were wrong. Illyra noticed it the moment she stepped into the ritual hall. The eastern arrangement was tilted 2 inches left, throwing off the sacred symmetry that the mating ceremony required. A small thing, the kind of thing no one else would catch. But Illyra had been managing the Ashvale Pack ceremonial preparations since she was 19, and small things had a way of becoming catastrophic when powerful wolves were involved. She crossed the hall quickly, weaving between pack members in formal dress, adjusting the arrangement with practiced efficiency. The hall was already filling. 300 wolves in their finest, voices low and electric with anticipation. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. The formal claiming of Alpha Ciro Ashvale's chosen mate, Selka of the Ironmore bloodline. A political match. A strategic union. The kind of mating that kept alliances alive and pack borders secure. Illyra straightened the last candle and stepped back. Around her, wolves who outranked her by 3, 4, or 5 levels barely registered her presence. That was fine. That was the arrangement she'd learned to live inside. Her mother had been the same, quietly essential, consistently invisible, trusted with the sacred details precisely because no one considered her a threat. Half-bloods rarely were. She moved toward the back of the hall, finding her usual position near the secondary flower arrangement, close enough to intervene if something needed adjusting, far enough that she would not accidentally appear in the ceremonial photographs. She had perfected this particular kind of invisibility over years of practice. The hall doors opened. Selka entered first. Illyra had to admit, even privately, where no one could hear, that Selka was extraordinary. Tall, silver-haired, with the refined bearing of someone raised knowing exactly what she was worth, she moved through the crowd like she was already its mistress. Her wolf was close to the surface in the way high-ranking females' wolves often were during mate ceremonies, visible in the particular stillness of her eyes, the way the other wolves shifted slightly to give her room. Then Ciro entered, and the room changed. It wasn't that the temperature dropped, exactly. It was more like the air became heavier, denser, the way the atmosphere compressed before a lightning strike. 300 wolves felt it and adjusted accordingly, straightening spines, dropping gazes, some baring throats in the subtle, instinctive gesture of submission that dominant presence triggered in pack animals. Illyra did not bare her throat. She had learned early that her wolf, quiet and half-blooded and never particularly impressive, didn't produce the instinctive submission response that full-blood pack members felt toward the alpha. It was one of the quiet humiliations of her existence. She couldn't feel the pack bond the way others did. Couldn't feel the warmth and belonging that connected the Ashvale wolves to each other and to their leader. She watched Ciro Ashvale from across the room with the detached appreciation she gave to anything she was not part of. He was striking in the way that things built for power were striking, not beautiful, exactly, but constructed with such uncompromising precision that beauty was almost irrelevant. Dark hair, dark eyes that carried that particular alpha quality of seeming to see every person in a room simultaneously. His jaw was sharp. His posture was absolute. He wore his authority the way other men wore skin. not as something put on, but as something grown into so completely that you couldn't imagine where the wolf ended and the man began. He walked to the altar. The ceremony began. Illyra stopped watching him and returned to watching the candles, which was her job. The elder wolf leading the ceremony spoke the old words, the invocation of the moon goddess, the blessing of the bond, the formal declaration of intent. Selka's expression was composed and radiant. Ciro's was unreadable in the way it always was. Illyra was watching the eastern candle arrangement. The tallest flame was flickering, which meant either a draft from the east-facing window or a wick that hadn't been properly trimmed when she felt it. A presence at her back. Her wolf stirred, which was unusual. Her wolf rarely stirred for anything. She thought someone was moving past her in the crowd. The hall was packed, small proximities were inevitable, and she stepped slightly to the left to give them room. The presence didn't pass. It stopped, directly behind her, close enough that she could feel warmth. And then so quickly, so precisely, so deliberately that it could not have been an accident, breath touched the back of her neck. Fingers brushed her hair aside, and lips, cold, deliberate, for seconds, gone. Illyra turned immediately, or tried to, but the crowd pressed around her, and by the time she'd shifted to look, there was nothing. Just the people around her, all facing forward, all watching the altar with the focused attention that ceremony demanded. She turned back to the front. Ciro was standing at the altar beside Selka, exactly where he'd been before. His hand was on Selka's shoulder, the traditional placement for the blessing. His expression was unchanged. He did not look at Illyra. The ceremony continued. Later, walking home through the cold dark of the packed grounds, Illyra lifted her fingers to the back of her neck. Nothing there. No mark, no irritation, nothing she could feel with her fingertips. Just skin. She told herself she'd imagined it. Her wolf disagreed. For the first time in Illyra's memory, her wolf, small, quiet, half-formed by a diluted bloodline, was pacing, moving back and forth in the interior space where wolves lived, alert and restless and bothered by something Illyra's human mind couldn't yet name. Settle, she told it. It didn't. She went to bed and lay awake listening to its pace. 3 weeks passed. In that time, Illyra prepared flowers for the Ashvale Pack's monthly council gathering, helped the elder women preserve ceremonial herbs, and quietly managed the 17 small details that made the Pack's sacred life run smoothly. She was good at her work. She was consistent. She did not cause problems. She also began to change. It started with her senses. She'd always had enhanced sensory perception, one of the gifts of being wolf-blooded even without a strong shift. But this was different, sharper, specific in a way that felt almost personal. She could smell rain 3 hours before it fell. She could hear conversations through walls that had previously been adequate sound barriers. She could detect the emotional states of wolves who passed her in hallways, anger carrying a copper bite, fear of something thin and acrid, happiness a warmth that bordered on gold. And him. She could smell him everywhere. This was the part she tried hardest not to think about. Ciro's scent, something cold and deep, like stone in winter and smoke from a fire built to last, had no reason to be on her pillow, had no reason to be in the air of her apartment, which was on the east edge of the packed grounds, far from the Alpha estate, had no reason to follow her through her days like a thread attached somewhere between her ribs, pulling gently and persistently toward. She'd stop that thought every time it reached its conclusion. Then came the exhaustion. She wasn't sleeping poorly. She was sleeping 10, 11 hours and waking tired. Her appetite was strange, craving things she didn't normally eat. She felt tender in her body in ways that she associated with illness, except she wasn't ill. Her wolf had stopped pacing. It had settled into something that frightened her more than the pacing had, a low, steady, protective alertness. The kind of stance that wolves adopted when they were guarding something. By the end of the 3rd week, she knew. She didn't want to know. She spent 3 days arguing about it. But the body has its own certainty, and eventually the mind has to catch up. She went to the pack healer at dawn, when no one else would be seeking treatment. Marin was 63 years old and had been the Ashvale Pack's healer for 30 of those years. She had a face built for absorbing difficult information without showing it. Deep lines, steady eyes, hands that did their work without trembling. Those hands trembled slightly when she examined the back of Illyra's neck. When did this appear? Marin asked. There's nothing there, Illyra said. I checked. Multiple times. Come here. Marin guided her to a mirror, a floor-length glass in the back of the treatment room. She tilted Illyra's head forward and held a smaller mirror behind. Look. Illyra looked. There, at the nape of her neck, was a mark she had never seen before. Not a bruise. It had no bruise's yellow edges or spreading imprecision. It was crescent-shaped, barely the size of a thumbnail, with a faint silver luminescence that was only visible in certain light. It looked like something had been pressed into her skin from the inside. I've only seen this in books, Marin said, setting the mirror down carefully. Illyra stared at her own reflection. What is it? A prime mark. Marin moved to her cabinet, pulling out a text so old the spine had been repaired with twine. It's older than mating bites. Older than most of our current traditions. It was used by the first generation of alpha wolves, before the mate bond was as widely understood as it is now. She found the page and set the book on the table between them. The prime mark establishes a claiming bond through intent and physical contact. It doesn't require the mark party's active participation. The words landed in the room like something dropped from a height. It doesn't require consent, Illyra said flatly. Marin was quiet. Someone marked me without my consent. More silence. Marin. Illyra's voice was very steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. Who is the only wolf in this pack who could produce a prime mark? The healer closed the book. Didn't answer. The alpha, Illyra said. It's the alpha, isn't it? Marin sat down heavily in her chair. I need to do one more test. Do it. The test took 5 minutes. Marin worked in silence, hands precise and expression carefully blank. When she set down the final vial, she looked at the results for a long time before she spoke. Illyra. Her voice was very quiet. You're pregnant. The room went absolutely still. 6 weeks, Marin continued. The child's energy signature it's consistent with Ashvale bloodline. Upper tier. The prime mark would have the bond works on a cellular level. It doesn't require, she stopped. Reorganized. The pregnancy is related to the marking. The prime mark in ancient tradition was not just a claiming mechanism. It was she searched for words, a bridge between bloodlines that were meant to merge. Illyra heard all of this from somewhere slightly outside her own body. The child is his, she said. Yes, and he did this deliberately. Marin folded her hands on the table, did not answer, which was itself an answer. Illyra stood up. Her legs were perfectly steady. Her hands were not shaking. She recognized, experiencing the particular calm that arrived after a blow large enough to short-circuit panic, the quiet that preceded an avalanche. Thank you, she said, for telling me the truth. She walked to the door. Illyra. Marin's voice stopped her. Be careful what you do with this information. There are people in this pack who would want to know about this. People whose interests are not. I understand. Illyra opened the door. I'm going to talk to him. She walked out into the morning light. She had taken exactly 4 steps when she nearly walked directly into Ciro's second-in-command, Talon, a broad-shouldered beta with sharp eyes and the controlled energy of someone who was always watching. He looked at her face. He looked at the back of her neck, at the mark that was faint enough to miss, but not invisible, not anymore, not with the morning light hitting it at this angle. His eyes went very still. Illyra kept walking. Behind her, she heard the quiet sound of a phone being unlocked. Chapter 2. The Alpha Estate sat at the northern end of Ashvale Pack territory, a stone building that looked as though it had grown from the mountain rather than been built against it. Illyra had been inside it perhaps a dozen times in her life, always for ceremonial purposes, always in the company of other staff, always invisible. She walked through the front entrance like she owned the floor. The guard at the door, a young wolf who'd been stationed here long enough to know her face, started to raise a hand. She looked at him with an expression that made him lower it again. She wasn't sure what was in her face. Whatever it was, it worked. She went directly to the Alpha's study. The door was closed. She knocked once. Enter. She entered. Cyril was at his desk, reviewing what appeared to be territorial boundary maps, detailed, annotated, the kind of cartography that represented weeks of careful intelligence. He didn't look up immediately, which was the prerogative of power. Making people wait was a dominance tool, so basic it barely registered as intentional anymore. Illyra crossed the room and stood in front of his desk. He looked up. His expression did not change. Not a flicker, not a shift, the same carved stone neutrality that he wore as a permanent feature. But his eyes moved, just once, quickly to the back of her neck, then back to her face. He knew exactly why she was here. "You marked me," she said. Yes, no hesitation, no performance of confusion or false innocence, just the single syllable, flat and unapologetic. Something in Illyra's chest tightened. She had expected denial. She had prepared for denial. The directness was almost worse. "You did it during the ritual, while everyone was watching Selka." She kept her voice even. "For seconds. That's all it took." "Yes." Without asking me. A pause. Barely perceptible. "Yes. I'm pregnant," she said. "And here." Finally, something crossed his face. Not a shock. Not guilt. Something more complicated, more fractured. Something she couldn't quite name before his expression reassembled itself. "I know," he said. She stared at him. "You know. Marin reports to me." Illyra absorbed this. The healer, the woman who'd examined her, who'd sat with her, who'd said, "Be careful what you do with this information," reported directly to the Alpha, which meant the moment Illyra had walked through that door this morning, a message had gone out. Which meant the moment she'd stepped into Marin's treatment room, she had stepped into something already in motion. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. Cyril set down the stylus he was holding. He stood, slowly, the way very large and very certain things moved, with the patience of something that didn't need to rush. He came around the desk and stopped at a careful distance from her, close enough that she could feel the weight of his presence, far enough to be deliberate about giving her space. "Your mother," he said, "was Vala of the Veilborn line, the last daughter of a bloodline that this pack, and every pack in the Northern Territories, believed was extinct." Illyra went still. "Your mother was not extinct," he continued. "She was hidden, by her own choice. She married your father, took his name, and spent 23 years being the woman who arranged flowers and trimmed ceremonial wicks, and made herself so consistently unremarkable that no one ever looked closely enough to see what she carried in her blood." Illyra thought of her mother, small and quiet and warm, the woman who'd braided her hair every morning until Illyra was old enough to manage it herself, who'd taught her the names of every herb used in pack ceremonies, who'd died of ordinary illness 3 years ago, quietly, without drama, the way she'd done everything. "She never told me," Illyra said. "She was protecting you." "From what?" Cyril's jaw tightened slightly. "From people like me." The honesty of that landed hard. "The Veilborn bloodline," he continued, moving to the window, "carries gifts that most wolves have forgotten were ever possible. The ability to walk between the living world and the spirit realm. The ability to communicate with wolves who have died. The ability, when mated to an alpha of sufficient power, to produce a child who carries both the alpha bloodline's dominance and the Veilborn gifts." He paused. "Such a child would be, according to every ancient text I've been able to find, capable of breaking a curse that has been destroying this pack for 3 centuries. The silence stretched. "What curse?" Illyra asked. He turned from the window. In the morning light, she could see lines in his face that she hadn't noticed from across the ritual hall. The particular exhaustion of someone carrying something too heavy for too long alone. "Later," he said. "There's more you need to understand first. I think I'm the one who decides what I need to understand, given that's you." "You're right." The interruption was quiet. "You are. And I owe you a full explanation. I'll give you one." His eyes met hers directly. "But first I need to know that you're safe, because there are people in this pack who already know about the mark. And their response to that information is not going to be warm." "Selka," Illyra said. Something shifted in his expression. "Among others. How much does she know?" "She knows about the Veilborn bloodline. She knows about the prophecy. He paused. She doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. Yet. The word sat in Illyra's stomach like a stone. What happens when she does? Cyril held her gaze. That, he said carefully, is exactly what I'm afraid of. She did not stay in his study that day. She had not agreed to anything, had made no promises, had accepted nothing. She walked out with the same steady legs she'd walked in with, returned to her apartment, and sat on the edge of her bed for a very long time. Her wolf had not paced once during the conversation. It had been completely eerily calm, the way it had been since the morning of the marking. Still, attentive, aimed somehow in his direction, the way a compass needle aligned to north. She hated that. She hated that her wolf had been altered by something she hadn't agreed to, was responding to a bond she hadn't chosen, and was finding comfort and orientation in the proximity of a man who had, by any honest measure, done something unforgivable. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. 6 weeks. A child so new it was barely a whisper of life, a possibility still becoming itself inside her. She knew almost nothing about early pregnancy, had no context for it, no framework. But she was aware of the warmth. A very faint, very specific warmth, distinctly different from her own body heat, as though something small and vital had lit a candle somewhere inside her. She was still sitting there when her apartment door opened. She hadn't heard a knock. Selka stepped inside. She was dressed simply, no ceremonial finery, no political performance. Just a woman in dark clothes and boots, with silver hair pulled back and eyes like polished ice. She carried 2 cups of tea, which was the most disarming thing Illyra had ever seen her do. She set one on the table in front of Illyra. She sat down without being invited. I know, Selka said. Illyra looked at her. About the mark. About the pregnancy. Selka wrapped both hands around her own cup. Maren keeps me informed. She has for years. A small, precise smile. Did you think I was unaware of the prophecy? Did you think I came to this pact without understanding exactly what Ciro needed and what he was looking for? Illyra said nothing. She was mapping the room. Exits. Distances. Options. I'm going to make you an offer, Selka continued pleasantly, because I believe in being direct. She took a sip of her tea. You leave. Quietly. Tonight. Tomorrow, whenever you're ready. I'll arrange transport resources. You'll have enough to start over somewhere comfortable. Somewhere completely new. Where no one knows you're half-blood or veil-born or anything other than a woman beginning her life. And the child, Illyra said. The child comes to me. Once it's born, Selka set down her cup. It will be raised as Ciro's heir, which it is. It will be protected, educated, given every advantage. You'll know it's safe. That's more than most mothers in your position could hope for. Illyra looked at this woman, this composed, strategic, beautiful woman who had spent years building a position, years managing information, years placing herself precisely where she needed to be, and felt something crystallize in her chest. Not anger, clarity, or, Illyra said, I refuse. Selka's smile did not waver. Then I tell the council that a half-blood used veil-born manipulation, blood magic, which is illegal in 3 territories, to seduce the alpha during a sacred ceremony. I'll have witnesses who'll swear they saw you whisper something at his neck during the ritual. She tilted her head. You'll be stripped of your pack status. Declared rogue. Expelled from Ashvale territory. A pause. A pregnant rogue female in winter with nowhere to go. I wonder how long that story ends. The room was very quiet. Illyra looked at the tea she hadn't touched. At Selka's precise, patient expression. At the door behind Selka, which was the only exit. Then she stood up. She knocked the tea off the table. It shattered on the floor between them. I have been underestimated, Illyra said quietly, by better wolves than you. My entire life, people have looked at me and seen the flowers and the candles and the invisible half-blood who makes everything run. And they have never once asked themselves what a woman learns in 20 years of listening from the background of other people's important moments. She looked Selka directly in the eye. I know where everybody is buried in this pack, metaphorically and otherwise. I know every alliance, every debt, every quiet secret that people spoke freely because they forgot I was in the room. She stepped closer. I have information that would end 3 political careers in this pack and compromise 2 border alliances. And I have not used any of it because I am not interested in power. But I am interested in my child. And if you ever, the word dropped like a stone, ever touch what is mine again, I will burn down everything you've built. Quietly, efficiently, and no one will be able to trace it back to me. She picked up her jacket from the chair. I'm going for a walk, she said. Don't be here when I return. She walked out. Her hands were completely steady. She was 2 minutes from the estate when she realized she was shaking. Not from fear, from something more complicated. The particular tremor that followed adrenaline when the thing you were afraid of turned out to be survivable. She pressed herself against the outer wall of the groundskeeper's building and breathed through it, slow and deliberate, until the shaking stopped. Her wolf was doing something she'd never felt like doing before. I was proud of her. She felt it, a warm, distinct, almost surprised warmth from that interior space, the animal recognition that its person had done something worth recognizing. It was such a small thing, such an unexpected thing. She'd spent years being ashamed of her wolf, apologizing for its quietness, its lack of dominance, its failure to fully integrate the way powerful pack wolves animals did. She had not expected it to be proud of her. She pressed her hand over her heart. Then she went back to the estate, not to her apartment, to Ciro's study. She knocked once. Enter. She entered. He was still at his desk. He looked up immediately this time. Selka came to my apartment, Illyra said. He went completely still. She offered me transport and resources if I leave tonight and give her the child when it's born. Illyra moved to the chair across from his desk and sat down, uninvited. She threatened to tell the council I used blood magic. Ciro's expression had done something she'd never seen it do before. The stone was still there. The fundamental composure was intact. But underneath it, something had ignited. Something dark and territorial and absolutely furious. She went to your apartment, he said. Each word is precise. Yes. Alone. Yes. A muscle moved in his jaw. He stood. I need to. Sit down. Illyra's voice was calm. I handled it. He stopped. I looked at her. I handled it, she repeated. I need you to understand that I am not someone who requires rescuing from a woman with a teacup and a threat. What I need from you is information. She held his gaze. You said there's a curse. Explain it. All of it. Now. He sat down. And he told her. When she finally left the study 2 hours later, night had fallen over the packed grounds. The stars were out, sharp and cold, the way they got in this part of the territory when the temperature dropped below freezing. She walked slowly, processing the shape of everything he'd told her. The curse was 300 years old, and Ashvale Alpha had destroyed the Veilborn family to prevent a prophecy he feared. The last dying Veilborn woman had laid the curse with her final breath. Not a curse of violence or immediate destruction, but something slower and more precise. Each generation of Ashvale Alphas would be born with a slightly more diminished capacity for the mate bond, for the emotional connection that defined wolf nature, for warmth. Ciro's grandfather had barely felt his mate. His father had felt almost nothing. Ciro had spent his entire life feeling nothing at all. Not numbness exactly, just absence. The space where something was supposed to exist, recognizable only because everyone around him described what filled it, and he could map the shape of the empty place by the outlines of what he was told should be there. She thought about that as she walked. She thought about what it must feel like to watch every other wolf in your pack experience a fundamental truth of your shared nature and feel only the absence of it. She was angry with him. She was. What he had done was a violation. The marking, the pregnancy, the years of planning, the complete absence of her consent in any of it. She was not going to pretend otherwise, or let the explanation dissolve the wrong. But she was beginning to understand the shape of the desperation behind it. She stopped walking. At the back of her neck, the prime mark tingled, a faint, silver-edged warmth that she was beginning to associate with proximity to him. She was 30 meters from the estate. The bond was already that sensitive. Her hand went to her stomach. I'll figure this out, she thought, to the small candle-warm thing growing inside her. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I'll figure it out. The wind shifted. She smelled something unfamiliar, chemical, sharp, wrong. She turned. Standing at the edge of the tree line, 20 meters away, was a figure she didn't recognize. Not an Ashvale wolf. The scent was wrong. The posture held none of the familiar pack energy. Their eyes caught the moonlight. They were watching her. Not the estate. Her. Illyra took one step back toward the building. The figure turned and melted into the trees. She ran the rest of the way inside. Chapter 3. She found the vial the next morning. It was sitting on her bathroom counter inside her apartment behind a locked door that showed no signs of forced entry. A small glass cylinder, no bigger than her thumb, containing something dark and viscous that moved too slowly when she tilted it. Tied around its neck with a red thread was a single strip of paper with 3 words written in a hand she didn't recognize. For the problem, Illyra didn't touch it. She stood in her bathroom doorway for 60 seconds, breathing slowly, letting her wolf process the scent. Something sharp and bitter beneath the glass smell. Something green and wrong. She knew what silver moss was. Every wolf in a pack with strong healing traditions learned the dangerous plants alongside the useful ones. The silver moss, distilled into a preparation like this, was one of the few things that could end a wolf pregnancy in the first trimester. It was banned in 6 territories. Possession alone carried pack sanctions. Someone had gotten into her locked apartment, left her a message, tied with red thread. She went to the kitchen and found a ceramic bowl, carried it back to the bathroom, and used a cloth to move the vial without touching it. She sealed the bowl with its lid. Then she sat on the edge of her bathtub and thought very carefully about her next move. Marin was compromised. Selka had eyes inside the healer's office. The council would not, by default, be sympathetic to a half-blood making accusations against the Alpha's chosen mate. Ciro had power, yes, but Selka had information, and information was often more dangerous than authority. Illyra thought about the figure in the trees last night, the unfamiliar scent, the deliberate, watchful presence. She picked up her phone. Someone entered my apartment. She texted to the only contact she trusted to be unmonitored, a beta female named Lisette who'd been quietly kind to her for years without ever asking for anything in return. Left something behind. I need an independent witness. Can you come now? The response came in under a minute. On my way. Don't touch anything. Lisette arrived in 8 minutes. She was compact, brown-haired, with the particular competence of someone who'd spent 20 years in pack security before retiring to a quieter role. She looked at the sealed bowl. She looked at Illyra's face. She asked no questions. She took photographs with her personal phone, not the pack network device that Illyra knew was monitored. She examined the bathroom door, the window locks, and the ventilation panel in the ceiling, which turned out to have fresh scratches on the interior frame. That's how they got in, she said. Small wolf, or someone very comfortable with tight spaces. She looked at Illyra carefully. This is a professional message, not an emotional one. Someone very controlled did this. I know who. Don't tell me. Not yet. Lisette closed her notebook. Tell me what you need. Evidence, Illyra said. Documented, witnessed, traceable. Whatever was left in that vial. I need it identified formally. And I need the photograph stored somewhere the Ashvale Pack network can't access or erase. Lisette was quiet for a moment. You're going to take this to the council. Eventually. Not yet. Illyra picked up the sealed bowl carefully. First, I'm going to take it to the one person who can authenticate it without Selka knowing. The Alpha, Lisette said. Yes, you're trusting him. I'm using him, Illyra corrected. There's a difference. Lisette studied her for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag. The independent storage is handled. I'll send you the access codes. She moved to the door. Illyra, whatever is happening here, you're not navigating it alone. I want you to know that. Illyra looked at her. Thank you, she said quietly, and meant it in a way that cost her something to say. Ciro's reaction to the vial was everything she'd expected and a few things she hadn't. The expected, immediate, controlled fury. The kind of anger that didn't shout or gesture, but went absolutely still, the way very dangerous things went still before they moved. He looked at the bowl, at the photographs Lisette had sent to Illyra's phone. At the analysis he had his personal chemist run within the hour, which confirmed silver moss, concentrated, at a dose sufficient to terminate an early wolf pregnancy without leaving traces that standard pack medical screens would catch. The unexpected. He looked at Illyra's face for a long time after the chemist left. Long enough that she had to make a conscious decision not to look away. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Physically, yes. Nothing was ingested." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. "No, I'm not all right. Someone got into my home and left a message telling me my child is a problem to be solved. That's not an experience that produces all right." He absorbed that, nodded once. "I'm moving you to the estate," he said. "Today. Your apartment is compromised and I'm not." Something moved across his expression, restrained quickly. "You'll be safer here. I'll be a prisoner here. You'll be protected here." He kept his voice very careful. "I'm not giving you an order. I'm asking." That was unexpected enough to stop her. She looked at him, really looked at him, past the alpha authority and the carved composure and the man who'd planned her marking for years without once asking if she'd consent, and saw something she hadn't seen in the study the previous day. Something she suspected he didn't often allow to be visible. Fear, not of Selka or the council or political consequence. Something older than that. She could have, he stopped. Started again. "The child is mine. Whatever I've done, whatever you think of me, I am asking you to let me protect what is mine." A pause. "What is ours?" The word ours sat in the air between them. Illyra thought about her empty apartment with its ventilation panel that had been violated, about the figure in the trees, about Selka's pleasant, predatory smile. "I have conditions," she said. "Name them. My own rooms. Not connected to yours. Separate wing. Separate entrance. Full access to the library and grounds. No monitoring of my communications. No one enters my space without my explicit permission, including you." She held his gaze. "Especially you." "Agreed. And you explain everything to me. The curse, the prophecy, what you expect this child to be capable of. What you plan to do about Selka, all of it. No more strategic omissions." "Agreed. And when I want to leave," she said, "I leave. This is not a permanent arrangement. I'm staying until the threat is managed, and then we negotiate what comes next." He held her gaze for a moment. "Agreed." She picked up the sealed bowl and handed it back to him. "I also want this formally documented with the Council's independent archivist. Not Ashvile's internal records. Independent." Something crossed his face that might, in a different light, have been the beginning of respect. "I'll arrange it," he said. "Good." She moved toward the door. "I'll have my things packed within the hour." She was at the door when he spoke. "Illyra." She turned. "The man in the trees last night," he said. "Talon told me about the figure you saw. It wasn't one of mine." She waited. "It was Ironmore. Selka's pack sent a watcher 2 days ago. They've been on our borders since the ritual." His jaw tightened. "This isn't only about Selka's personal ambition. There's something larger involved." "How large?" He looked at her steadily. "Large enough that I no longer think the plan I made, the marking, the way I went about this, was as private as I believed." A pause. "Someone told Ironmore what to watch for. Someone who knew about the Veilborn bloodline before I moved." The implication settled over her slowly. "There's a traitor in Ash Vale," she said. "Yes. And they're feeding information to Selka's pack." "Yes. Which means," Illyra said carefully, "that Selka didn't come to your pack to marry you. She came to intercept the prophecy." Cyril held her gaze. "That's what I believe." She stood in the doorway for a long moment. "Then we have a larger problem than I thought," she said. "We do." She looked at him, this powerful, cold, complicated man who had wronged her and was now asking her, with something that looked remarkably like genuine fear, to stay, to trust him, to let him be something other than the thing he'd been when he'd pressed his lips to her neck without asking. "I'll be back in an hour," she said, and she left to pack her things. Chapter 4. The east wing of the Ashvale estate had been unoccupied for 11 years. Illyra learned this from Lyra, the young wolf assigned to help her settle in, a cheerful, sharp-eyed girl of about 20 who seemed genuinely delighted to have something interesting to do. The East Wing had been Ciro's mother's space, Lyra explained, while making up the bed with practiced efficiency. She died when Ciro was 22. No one had used the room since. Illyra looked around at the space. Large windows, good light, a fireplace that worked, bookshelves that were half full of the previous occupants' reading. Good bones. A little cold in the way that long uninhabited spaces were cold, but nothing that a fire and a few days of use wouldn't address. He had the fireplace checked yesterday, Lyra said, apparently reading her expression. And the windows were recaulked. And someone brought fresh linens. She smoothed the last pillowcase. He also had the kitchen stocked with, she hesitated, specific things. I wasn't told why. What things? Illyra asked. Chamomile. Ginger. The bread from the northern bakehouse, the dense kind, not the ceremonial loaves. Dried apricots. A pause. Things that are easier on a sensitive stomach. Illyra stood very still. He'd had the kitchen stocked for pregnancy nausea. Before she'd even agreed to move in. Before she'd named her conditions, or he'd agreed to them. He'd anticipated her saying yes. She didn't know whether to be irritated by the presumption or moved by the preparation. She settled cautiously on both. The first 3 days were strange. Strange in the way that proximity to something you decided to resist was always strange, constantly aware of the edges of the decision, constantly checking whether it still held. She moved through the estate carefully. I learned its geography. Found the library, enormous, old, with a section of Wolf heritage text that she immediately wanted to spend a week inside. Found the gardens, still accessible despite the cold, where a path had been recently cleared of snow. Ciro was present and not present simultaneously. He had duties. The running of a large pack generated a constant stream of decisions, disputes, negotiations. She saw him at meals which were taken in the small dining room rather than the formal hall, and in the evenings when his workday ended and he did something she hadn't expected. He talked to her, not about the curse or the politics or the compound problem of Selka and the Ironmore Watchers. Just talked. About the pack's history, which he knew in extraordinary detail. About the Eastern Territorial Boundary, dispute that had been ongoing for 6 years and showed no signs of resolution. About a young wolf in the lower ranks who'd shown surprising leadership capability and was being quietly mentored. He asked about her, what she'd read lately, what she thought about the boundary dispute, whether she'd had any history education about the Veilborn, or whether her mother's silence had extended to that as well. She answered carefully at first, then less carefully. Then she forgot to be careful at all. And 2 hours had passed and she'd said more than she'd intended, and he'd been paying attention to every word of it in a way that was distinctly unsettling. He brought her tea on the 4th evening without being asked. The specific kind. The right temperature. Without comment. She accepted it without comment. Afterward, alone in her rooms, she sat by the fire and acknowledged, with deep reluctance, that he was attempting something. Not seduction. Nothing so simple or predictable. Something more patient than that. He was showing up. Consistently, quietly, without an agenda visible enough to resist. He was being present in the way that a man who had never had warmth modeled for him was figuring out, by trial and careful observation, how warmth was supposed to work. It infuriated her. It moved her. Both. Simultaneously. Which was the worst possible combination. A week into her stay at the estate, she woke at 3 a.m. from a dream she couldn't hold onto, something dark and fast, gone the moment her eyes opened, leaving only its residue of terror. Her wolf was standing at full alert in her chest, pacing again the way it had paced in the days after the marking. She sat up, breathed, waited for the adrenaline to pass. It didn't. The wolf wasn't afraid of the dream. The wolf was afraid of something else, something immediate, something present in the building. She got up, checked the door to the corridor, locked as she'd left it, checked the windows sealed, intact. Nothing in her rooms that shouldn't be there. She pressed her hand to the wall. On the other side of the west-facing wall, the wall that separated the east wing from the main body of the estate, she could feel it. Not through the wall itself, but through the bond. a vibration, very faint, that she'd been becoming increasingly aware of in the days since she'd moved in. Ciro, his presence in the bond felt different tonight. Usually it was a background note, quiet and steady, like a fire in a room you weren't occupying. The warmth felt without the heat being overwhelming. But tonight it was ragged, irregular, like that fire had gotten out of control. She stood there for a moment. Then she opened her door, crossed the corridor, and knocked on the door of his private study, the room directly on the other side of the wall. A long pause. Then, "Come in." He was standing at the window, not working, not reading, just standing in the dark with the moonlight on his face, and he looked, for just one unguarded moment before he registered her presence and adjusted, like a man who had been losing a battle he was too proud to name. "I felt something," she said, "through the bond. Are you all right?" He turned. The adjustment was in place now, composure restored, expression neutral. But she'd seen the second before it. "I'm fine," he said. That's not what it felt like from the other side of the wall. He was quiet. She crossed the room and sat in one of the chairs by the dark fireplace, not inviting him to explain himself, just being there, the way he'd been there for her in the kitchen and at meals and in the evenings, just present, just consistently not leaving. After a long moment, he sat in the other chair. "I dream about my father," he said, the way he was at the end. She waited. He was entirely alpha. Every external quality. Strength, authority, strategy, control. The pack respected him absolutely. A pause. He also couldn't remember my mother's name by the end. He knew the word, knew it was the name of the woman he'd mated, the woman who died when I was 12, but it carried nothing. No weight, no warmth, just a label. The fire needed to be built, but neither of them moved to build it. "He told me once," Ciro continued, voice very flat and very careful, "that it was a kindness, that loving something that could be lost was a vulnerability. Those alphas who could feel too deeply made bad decisions." He looked at the cold fireplace. I believed him for a very long time. "And now?" Illyra asked. He turned to look at her. "Now," he said, "I've spent a week watching you read at that table in the library, arguing with yourself out loud about territorial law, which, for the record, your interpretations are frequently correct, and eating dried apricots by the handful at 11 p.m., and explaining wolf heritage to a kitchen wolf half your size who was absolutely intimidated by you and I." He stopped. She waited. "I feel it," he said quietly. "Not everything. Not what I should feel, probably. But something, which is more than I have ever felt in my life for any person." The room was very quiet. "That's not love," she said carefully. "That's proximity and a magical bond you installed without my permission. I know. You don't get credit for feeling things as a result of what you did. I know that too. I'm not going to," she stopped. Started again. "I'm not going to pretend I don't feel it also. Because I do. And I hate that I do. And I'm not going to let it be a reason to forgive what you did before I'm ready to. But," she looked at the cold fireplace, "I'm here. And you're here. And whatever this is, we're apparently navigating it together, whether we chose that or not." A pause. "So," she stood, moved to the fireplace, "help me build this fire. And then you can tell me the rest of the curse. Because I've been doing my own research in the library, and there are things in the old text that you haven't explained yet." He stood, came to the fireplace. Their hands were close for a moment, working with the kindling. "What did you find?" he asked. "The curse has a specific breaking condition," she said. "And it's not just the child. The child is the fulfillment, but there's a prior condition. A restoration of what was taken." She looked at him. The veil-born woman who laid the curse didn't just want her bloodline to produce an heir. She wanted the alpha who destroyed her family to experience what his descendants had taken from them. "The mate bond." "The mate bond," she confirmed. "The full thing. Not proximity, warmth, or bond awareness. The real, complete connection." She met his eyes in the firelight. "Which means for the curse to break completely, for the child to have the full veil-born gift, you have to actually feel it." He held her gaze. "Feel what?" "Everything," she said quietly, "that you've spent your whole life without." The fire caught. The room was filled with warmth. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. The next morning, Illyra went to the library early, before the rest of the estate had fully woken. She was 3 chapters into a Valeborn genealogical text when she smelled something wrong. The same chemical sharpness from 2 weeks ago. The wrong scent she'd learned to associate with Iron Moor. Coming from inside the building. She was on her feet and moving before the thought fully formed. Chapter 5. The scent led her to the kitchen. The estate kitchen was large and usually occupied by 2 or 3 wolves managing the constant production of food for a pack household. At this hour, early in the morning, only one person should have been present, the senior cook, Bara, who started the bread at 5 a.m. without fail. Bara was there, and beside Bara, helping with absolutely nothing and watching everything with the kind of calculated attention that looked social from a distance, but wasn't, was a wolf Illyra had never seen before. Young, male, pack branded with ashvale markers, but the scent underneath was wrong. Layered, like something applied over something else. The way scent masking worked imperfectly when you didn't have full access to pack quality products. The wolf noticed Illyra the moment she walked in. His eyes went to her neck, then to her stomach, then back to her face. He had a cup of coffee in his hand that he hadn't touched. Illyra walked directly to Bara. Good morning. I'd like to take tea upstairs, the chamomile, please. Of course, Bara said, turning to the shelf. While Bara's back was turned, Illyra looked at the unfamiliar wolf. She let her wolf press forward, let the small, quiet, underestimated thing make itself felt. It wasn't dominance. It was something older. I see you, it said. I know what you are. The wolf set down his untouched coffee and left the kitchen without another word. Illyra waited until he was gone. Bara, she said quietly, the wolf who was just here. How long has he been in the estate? Bara turned with the chamomile. Her expression was careful. He came with the supplied delivery yesterday. Said he was a new assistant from the lower dens. A pause. I thought it was odd. We don't usually pull from the lower dens for estate work. Has he been in this kitchen before today? Yesterday afternoon, Bara said. For about 20 minutes. Illyra looked at the counter. The familiar, harmless surface of a working kitchen. Cutting boards, containers, jars, the kettle, the bread-proving basket, and beside it, tucked against the wall in a way that was almost invisible, a small, unremarkable ceramic pot that Bara used for nothing. Is that yours? Illyra asked, nodding toward it. Bara looked. No, Illyra didn't touch it. She took a mental photograph of its position. Then she accepted her tea, thanked Bara, and walked directly to Ciro's office. He was already in a meeting, 2 senior betas reviewing patrol reports, when she knocked. She opened the door without waiting. The betas looked up. Ciro's expression went from composed professional to something significantly more alert in the space of a single second as he read her face. Give us the room, he said. The betas left. Illyra explained in 40 words. The infiltrator. The wrong scent. The ceramic pot in the kitchen. The wolf who'd watched her stomach. Ciro was already on his feet before she finished. Stay here, he said. Don't. Please, he said. The word came out in a way that sounded unused, like something he'd found at the back of a drawer and wasn't entirely sure how to hold. Please stay here while I handle this part. She stayed. He was back in 6 minutes with the ceramic pot sealed in an evidence bag, and something in his expression that was past anger, a cold, clean fury that had moved through the heat stage into something harder. The pot was empty, he said, but the residue on the interior is silver moss. Concentrated preparation. He set it on the desk. He'd already used what was inside. Illyra went still. Bara said he was in the kitchen for 20 minutes yesterday afternoon. Long enough to add something to, he stopped. Looked at her directly. What did you eat yesterday? Be specific. She thought back. The bread from the northern bakehouse. Dried apricots. The soup Bara made for the evening meal. The soup. His jaw tightened. Bara served it to everyone, but yours was portioned separately. It came out of a specific pot. The calculation was brief and terrible. I've been feeling ill, Illyra said slowly. I assumed it was a normal pregnancy, the nausea, the fatigue. I thought it was. Come with me. He was already moving. The estate's private healer, not Marin, who he'd removed from Illyra's care the day before and replaced with a healer whose loyalty he'd personally verified, examined her within the hour. A young woman named Pell, precise and unafraid of difficult news. The examination was thorough and took 20 minutes. Ciro stood at the window throughout. He didn't pace. His stillness was the kind that cost something to maintain. Pell finished. I looked at her notes. I looked at Illyra. The child is fine, she said first, and Illyra felt something unlock in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The Veilborn bloodline provides a level of protection that a standard wolf pregnancy wouldn't have. Whatever was in that soup, the dose wasn't sufficient to breach it. A pause. You were very lucky. Or the child was. Or both, Pell said. Illyra sat very still on the examination table. Ciro turned from the window. His expression was doing something she'd never seen before. It had fractured in a way that the composure couldn't fully contain. Not angry now. Something raw. He looked at her with the look of someone who had almost lost something they didn't entirely understand, yet how to keep. Are you in pain? He asked. His voice was different. No, she said. I'm no. Good. He moved to the door. Talon. His second-in-command appeared in the doorway immediately, which suggested he'd been standing directly outside it. The infiltrator, Ciro said. And Selka. I want them both in the formal hall in 1 hour. A pause. Alert the council elders. Tell them there's a matter requiring immediate arbitration. Use my authority to compel their attendance, if necessary. Yes, Alpha. And Talon. His voice went very quiet. No one in or out of this estate until I say so. Ironmoor wolves on our borders are to be formally detained under territorial law. If they resist, they are to be treated accordingly. Talon left. Illyra looked at Ciro. You're calling the council. Yes. That means everything comes out. The mark. The pregnancy. Your plan. Yes. He met her eyes. Is that, do you object? She considered it. Thought about the soup. About the apartment and the vial with red thread. About the figure in the trees and the infiltrator watching her stomach with cold, assessing eyes. No, she said. I don't object. She slid off the examination table. But I want to be there. Of course. And I want to speak for myself. Not to be spoken for. Something passed through his expression, warm and quick and gone almost immediately. I wouldn't dream of stopping you, he said. The formal hall filled quickly. 5 council elders arrived within 40 minutes. 2 clearly irritated at the hour, 1 visibly nervous, 2 with expressions so carefully neutral they were almost illegible. Selka was escorted in by Talon personally, which was not a subtle message. She walked in looking composed. She looked at Illyra standing at the front of the hall, and something very brief and very sharp moved behind her composed expression before she smoothed it away. Ciro waited until everyone was seated. Then he stood before the council, and he did something that Illyra, watching from 3 feet away, had not expected. He confessed. All of it. The planning. The years of research into the Veilborn bloodline. Identifying Illyra's mother. Tracking the line to Illyra herself. Arranging his position at the ritual specifically to have access to her. The 4-second mark during the ceremony while his chosen mate stood at the altar. He said it with his chin up and his voice level and his eyes on the council. He did not soften it or frame it in language that distributed responsibility. He said, I planned this. I did this. I did not ask for her consent. This was my decision, made alone, and I take full responsibility for every element of it. The hall was absolutely silent. Then one of the elders, a woman named Dreist, oldest of the 5, who'd been attending Ashvale Council since before Ciro was born, said, And the pregnancy? Is a result of the prime mark, Ciro said. The child is mine. Illyra is its mother. I have asked her to stay in this estate under my protection, and she has agreed to conditions that I have accepted. Dreist looked at Illyra. And you, she asked, do you confirm this account? Illyra met the elder's gaze. I confirm it. With additions. She held up the evidence bag with the ceramic pot. Last week someone used my apartment's ventilation panel to deliver silver moss to my bathroom counter. 2 days ago, an Ironmoor-scented infiltrator gained access to this estate's kitchen and added silver moss preparation to a soup intended for my personal meal. Both incidents can be documented. Both are traceable. She looked at Selka. I believe Lady Selka can account for both. The hall went very quiet. Selka's composure was extraordinary. She didn't flinch, didn't pale, didn't show anything that could be read as guilt. These are extraordinary accusations from a half-blood with an obvious motive, too. The infiltrator's scent, Ciro said, has been chemically analyzed and is consistent with Ironmore pack origin beneath a masking agent. The ceramic pot contains residue of the same silver moss preparation as the vial left in Illyra's apartment, which has been independently documented and archived with the regional archivist, outside of Ashvile's internal records. He paused. If Lady Selka has an explanation, I invite her to provide it. Silence. Selka's eyes moved to the ceramic pot. Something happened behind her expression, a very quick, very precise recalculation. I demand independent verification, she said, as is my right under Ironmore diplomatic protocol. Granted, Dreas said immediately, before Ciro could respond. This council will oversee verification. In the meantime, Lady Selka, you will remain in Ashvale territory under council supervision pending full investigation. The elder looked at Ciro. The proposed mating alliance with Ironmore is formally suspended. As for the prime mark and the resulting situation, she looked between Ciro and Illyra for a long moment. This council, she said slowly, will reconvene in 48 hours to determine the formal status of the child and its parents. In the interim, Illyra of the Valeborn line remains under royal pact protection. A pause. Does the Alpha have any objection to this arrangement? None, Ciro said. Does Illyra? Illyra looked at Dreas. At the council. At the hall full of wolves who had known her for years as invisible, as flowers and candles, as background detail, as the half-blood who made the ceremonies run. None, she said. Chapter 6. The 48 hours between the council session and the reconvening were the strangest of Illyra's life. Strange, because the estate was simultaneously more tense and more quiet than it had been since her arrival. The presence of the council elders, 3 of whom had chosen to remain in residence rather than return to their homes, changed the atmosphere in the way that formal authority always changed spaces. People moved more carefully. Conversations were conducted in lower voices. The pack felt itself being observed and adjusted accordingly. And strange because of the evenings. After each day's round of investigations, witness interviews, scent analyses, record reviews, Ciro came to the east wing at what had become their established hour. He sat across from her at the small table she'd moved near the fireplace. He drank the tea she'd started making, because it was something to do with her hands while they talked. He told her about the curse. Not the political version he'd given her in the study, the strategic framework, the prophecy, the plan. The real version, the one that cost him something to say. My father's last coherent conversation with me, he said on the second evening, watching the fire rather than her face, was about duty. About the responsibility of the Alpha. He said that emotion was a liability that weak alphas couldn't control and strong alphas learned to exercise. That the mate bond, as other wolves experienced it, was a kind of vulnerability that the curse had actually improved us by removing. A pause. He said I should be grateful. Illyra watched him. I was 18, he continued. I believed him. I went through my entire young adulthood believing that what I lacked was a strength rather than an absence, that I was more alpha for it. He looked at his hands. It took me until I was 31 to understand that I was mourning something, and then another 4 years to admit what I was mourning. What changed your mind? Illyra asked. He was quiet for a moment. I watched Talon's mating ceremony, he said. He mated a woman from the southern border pack. Quiet woman. Nothing remarkable about her from the outside. And when the ceremony was done and she walked toward him, the look on his face. He stopped. I couldn't parse it. It was something I didn't have language for. He looked like he'd been made of paper his entire life, and had just discovered he was stone. He looked up at her. I envied it, he said simply. For the first time in my life, I envied something. And I understood that what I'd been told was a strength was actually the deepest kind of wound. So you found the prophecy, Illyra said. I spent 2 years finding it. The old texts were scattered, damaged, deliberately obscured. The Ashvale bloodline 3 centuries ago had every reason to destroy documentation of what they'd done. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The Valeborn woman who laid the curse was named Vaila. She was the last of her line, or she believed she was. The Alpha of that generation had systematically destroyed her family to prevent the prophecy from ever being fulfilled. She was dying when she laid the binding. And she was angry, Illyra said. She was angry, he confirmed. But also, according to the one partial account that survived, she was still herself. She didn't lay a curse of destruction. She could have. She had enough power, even dying, to do catastrophic damage. He paused. She chose precision instead. She made it so the thing they'd taken from us, the capacity to connect, to love, to be fully bonded, became the condition for restoration. Not violence, not justice through suffering. He looked at Illyra. She built a door, and the key to the door was the exact thing my bloodline had destroyed her family to prevent. Illyra absorbed this. She was a better person than they deserved, she said. Yes, he said softly. She was. A long silence. I need to ask you something, Illyra said. He waited. When you were planning this, the marking, the years of watching, the decision to do it during the ceremony, did you ever consider that the reason it had to be secret, that it had to happen without my knowledge, was because you knew I would have said no? The question landed in the room like a stone in water. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I considered that. And you did it anyway. I did it anyway. Because the pact mattered more than my consent. He was quiet for a long moment. Because I told myself the pact mattered more than your consent, he said finally. Which is not the same thing. She looked at him. I have spent a great deal of time, he continued, voice very careful, since you arrived here, understanding the difference between what I told myself and what was true. He didn't look away. The truth is that I was afraid. I was afraid that if I asked you, you would say no, and I would have to live without the possibility of the thing I was mourning. That was cowardice dressed in strategy. Illyra said nothing. I cannot undo it, he said. If I could, he stopped. If I could go back, I would ask. I know that's insufficient. I know there's no version of I would have done it differently that restores what I took from you. But I want you to know that I understand what I took. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the trees that bordered the estate grounds. Illyra listened to it for a moment. Tell me about Vaila, she said. Everything you found. And he did. On the morning of the council's reconvening, Pell came to Illyra's rooms at first light. Not for an examination. She sat down across the small table with her hands folded and her expression carrying something serious and specific. I've been reviewing the genealogical records you've been pulling from the library, Pell said, cross-referencing with the medical documentation from your examination. And, Illyra asked, the Valeborn gift in your bloodline is stronger than we expected. Pell looked at her carefully. In a standard wolf pregnancy, the gift would be latent, present in the child's potential, but not active until long after birth, possibly not fully expressed until adulthood. She paused. This pregnancy is different. The Valeborn energy is already present and already responsive. Not to threat, exactly. More to emotional state. Illyra frowned. What do you mean? The nights when you sleep deeply and well, the child's energy signature is stable, calm, warm. The nights when you're in distress, when the bond is disturbed, when you're afraid, Pell met her eyes. The energy signature spikes. It responds to what you feel. It's already communicating. Illyra sat very still. I also noted, Pell continued, that in the 2 evenings you've spent in extended conversation with the Alpha, the signature shows a particular pattern. She hesitated. It's hard to describe clinically. The closest I can come is, it settles. The way something settles when it recognizes what it's been waiting for. Illyra looked at the door. Past the door, through the corridor, through the main body of the estate, to the west-facing study where Cyril was probably already at his desk, preparing for the council meeting. The curse condition, she said quietly. He has to feel the full bond. Yes, and the child already knows whether he does or doesn't. Pell was quiet. It's a built-in verification, Illyra said. Vaila built it in. The child can feel whether the bond is real, whether it's earned. She pressed her hand against her stomach. She made the air the judge. Pell nodded slowly. That's my interpretation as well. Illyra thought about this, about a dying woman 3 centuries ago who'd been precise even in her grief, who'd built a door and built the lock and built the key all at once, who'd required not just the right bloodline, but the right feeling, who'd trusted that love, real love, could be distinguished from everything that wasn't it. She thought about the evenings in the East Wing, about chamomile tea and Viola's story, and a man whose voice was different when he talked about things that mattered. She thought about her wolf, small, quiet, consistently underestimated, which had been still and certain and aimed in one direction since the night of the marking. She wasn't ready to call it what it might be, but she was beginning to understand the shape of what was growing, both inside her and otherwise. Chapter 7. The council met in the formal hall at noon. It was the same hall where the mating ceremony had been held. Same vaulted ceiling, same carved pillars, same rows of wolf-made symmetry. But today the ceremonial flowers were gone, replaced by the more austere furnishings of arbitration. A long table for the elders, chairs for the principals, and beyond them, the pack members who'd gathered to witness. The hall was full. Word had moved through Ashvale territory the way significant news always moved in packs, faster than seemed possible, carried in the spaces between formal announcements. They knew the essential shape of it. The Alpha's marking, the Veilborn Heir, the Ironmore infiltrators, and the evidence of Selka's coordination with them. What they didn't know yet was what the council would do about it. Illyra walked in with her head up. She wore one of her own dresses, not borrowed finery, not estate-provided formality. Her own clothes, the deep green that was her usual preference, simple and unadorned. She'd pinned her hair back and left the back of her neck visible, the crescent mark distinct in the midday light, filtering through the high windows. Cyril was already at the front table. He looked at her when she entered, and she saw the question in his eyes before she'd reached him. She met the question with a small nod. He exhaled fractionally. They sat side by side at the table, not touching, but the distance between them had changed, had collapsed from the careful, wary space of strangers to something closer to the distance between people who had been honest with each other in the dark and were now facing daylight with that honesty still between them. The council elder Dreist called the proceedings to order. The investigation's findings were presented first. The Ironmore infiltrator, who had, as it turned out, been planted in Ashvale territory 6 months prior, long before the mating ceremony, confirmed under formal questioning that he answered to Selka's household. The ceramic pot's residue matched the laboratory preparation found in Illyra's apartment. The scent masking used had been sourced from Ironmore's Eastern chemist, a detail that left no interpretive room. Selka's position collapsed in the methodical, irreversible way that well-documented evidence produced. She did not confess. She did not beg. She sat with her silver-haired composure and her ice-blue eyes and offered no defense, because there was no defense available, which was, Illyra thought watching her, almost admirable in its own terrible way. Then Dreist turned to the question of the prime mark and the child. She asked Cyril for his account. He gave the same account he'd given 2 days ago, complete, unsparing, without strategic framing. She asked Illyra. The Alpha marked me without my knowledge or consent, Illyra said. This is accurate. The pregnancy is a result of that marking, which was done with intent and planning over an extended period. She paused. I want to be precise about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. The hall was very quiet. I am not asking this council to punish him. I am not seeking redress, dissolution of the bond, or any remedy that would require the erasure of what has been created. She looked at the council. I am asking for one thing, formal recognition of the child's status, not as a consequence or a political product, but as a member of this pack with full rights and protections from this moment, regardless of what else is decided today. Dreist looked at her carefully. And the child's parentage? Both Ashvale and Veilborn, Illyra said. The heir has 2 bloodlines. Both matter. And your own status? She held the elder's gaze. Illyra of the Veilborn line. Not defined by my relationship to the Alpha. Not defined by what he did or didn't do. Defined by what I am. A pause. which is the last Veilborn in this territory, carrying the heir to a 300-year-old restoration. That's enough. That's sufficient standing for any room I choose to walk into. The hall murmured. Dreas looked at Ciro. And the Alpha's position on Illyra's status? Whatever she claims, Ciro said immediately. Without modification or condition, Dreas looked at her council colleagues. A series of quick, silent communications passed between them, the kind that long collaborative relationships made possible. Very well, the elder said. This council recognizes the child as Ashvale heir of Veilborn descent, with full pact protections effective immediately. Lady Selka of Ironmoor is formally expelled from Ashvale territory, and the proposed alliance is dissolved with cause. The Ironmoor border situation will be escalated to regional arbitration. She paused. The question of the Alpha and the Veilborn woman remains a matter between them. This council does not arbitrate the personnel. We deal in the formal. She looked between them. Whatever you two decide, decide it with the clarity that you've both apparently been practicing. A very slight, very dry inflection in her voice. The corners of Illyra's mouth moved. She pressed them flat. The session was formally closed. Selka was escorted out by council guards. She passed within 2 meters of Illyra on her way to the door. She didn't look at Illyra, didn't speak, just walked with that particular controlled posture of someone who was not finished, only paused. Illyra watched her go. She felt nothing she'd expected to feel. No satisfaction, no relief, no resolution. Just the quiet awareness that this particular threat had been managed and others would arise in its place. That was the nature of things. You handled one danger and the horizon produced another. But the child was protected. The child was formally recognized, formally shielded, formally part of this pack. That was what mattered. She was turning to look for Ciro when she smelled it. Not the wrong chemical scent of Ironmoor. Something else. Something that didn't fit the formal hall's careful ecosystem of pack wolves and council authority. Something old and green and charged, like the air before a storm that came from a direction you hadn't been watching. Her wolf came alive, not with the pacing restlessness of fear or the flat alertness of danger. Something else entirely. Something that rose from the deepest part of her wolf nature, from whatever remained of the Veilborn bloodline's ancient memory. And she felt her vision sharpen and her hearing extend and the mark on her neck blaze with heat so sudden and complete that she gasped. And she understood, without understanding how she understood, what was about to happen. Ciro. She said it without raising her voice. He turned immediately. One look at her face and he was moving 3 steps, his hand on her arm. Outside, she said. Now. He took her out the side door, through the corridor, into the open air of the estate grounds. The light was mid-afternoon white and cold. Snow on the ground from 2 days ago. The sky is a hard, clear blue. She stopped walking. What? He started. Stand still, she said. He stood still. She turned to face him. The Veilborn gift was rising in her the way tides rose. Not violently, not in a rush, but with a certainty that made resistance beside the point. She'd felt it in small ways since the pregnancy began. The dreams that weren't dreams, the pack bond she could feel through walls, the way she'd spoken the old tongue to the infiltrator in the kitchen without having been taught a single word of it. Small waves, preliminary. This was not a small wave. Look at me, she said. He was looking at her. Not at my face, she said. Look at me. And he did. Whatever it looked like from outside, and she'd never know. Because she was inside it, the Veilborn sight opened in her like a door that had been waiting years to find the correct key, and she looked at him, not at his expression or his authority or the careful composure he wore like armor. She looked at the place inside a person where wolves lived, where the bond lived, where the thing the curse had taken was supposed to be. She saw the shape of the absence, 3 generations deep, precise and total. The way surgical removal was precise, not damaged, not broken, just gone. The space where the complete mate bond was supposed to live, where warmth and recognition and the particular gravity of love was supposed to pull, was empty. Because, slowly, incrementally, over the weeks since she'd arrived at the estate, Over the evenings of chamomile tea and honest conversation and the peculiar discipline of a man learning, at 35, to be present for another person, something had been growing into that space. Small, tentative, new, but there, real. She saw it clearly and knew, with the veil-born certainty that bypassed doubt, that it was not the bond alone. It was not proximity or magic or the forced gravity of the prime mark. It was him, Ciro, the specific, irreducible man behind the alpha authority, choosing day after day, conversation after conversation, small act after small act, to feel something he'd been told was weakness. The child in her settled, the way Pell had described, the way Viola had built into the condition 3 centuries ago. Satisfied, recognized, found, Illyra breathed. "It's working," she said quietly. Cyril looked at her. Something in his face had changed, not the expression exactly, but the quality behind it. Like a window that had been painted over from the inside, the paint began, very slowly, to come away from the edges. "What is?" he asked. His voice was different. "The restoration," she said. "The curse is breaking." She pressed her hand to her sternum. "The child knows. Viola built it so the child would know when it was real." She met his eyes. "And it's real." He stood very still. "Ciro," she said, "what do you feel?" A long silence. He looked at his hands. I looked at her. Back at his hands, with the expression of a man experiencing something so foreign and so enormous that he was having to assemble language for it in real time. "Like I've been," he stopped. "Like there has been a closed door," he said slowly, "for 35 years. And I have been standing on one side of it. And I have known intellectually that there was something on the other side, because other people described it. But I couldn't open it and I couldn't hear through it, and eventually I stopped another stop. I stopped trying." She waited. "And right now," he said, very quietly, "the door is open." The estate grounds were very still. Snowlight, cold air, his expression fractured and unguarded and more nakedly himself than she had ever seen it. She reached out and took his hand. He looked down at where her fingers wrapped around his. The look on his face, she had no context for it. She had never seen it on him before. It was the look of a man at the exact moment that something impossible became real, and the impossible thing was so simple, so human, that the impossibility of having lacked it his entire life was only comprehensible now by its presence. "I'm still angry with you," she said. "I know," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. "I haven't decided anything yet. About us. About what this is. I'm not." She pressed his hand between both of hers. "I'm not there yet. I know. But the child is yours," she said. "And the curse is breaking because you," she looked up at him, "because you tried. Not because the bond forced you. Because you chose it. Every day," he said. "Every single day." She held his hand. Above them, the winter sky was hard and clear and enormous, cold in the way of things that lasted. Behind them, through the estate's stone walls, the pack moved and lived and continued. The formal hall where Selka had fallen. The library where Viola's story had been found again after 3 centuries of being lost. The veil-born mark at the back of Illyra's neck blazed warm. And inside her, something very small, barely a whisper, barely a person yet, was perfectly, entirely calm. Chapter 8. 3 months later, the estate had changed. Not the building itself. Stone and history and the accumulated weight of generations didn't shift easily. But the way it moved, the quality of the air inside it, the particular tempo of its daily life. Some of this was Illyra. She hadn't meant to alter the pace of the estate. She'd simply continued doing what she'd always done, noticing the small things, adjusting them, addressing the quiet problems that everyone else stepped over because they'd stopped registering them as problems. The ceremonial schedule was better organized. 3 ongoing disputes between lower-ranked wolves had been resolved through the particular, patient kind of listening that Illyra had been practicing her entire life. The library had been reorganized according to a system that actually made sense, and 3 previously lost texts had surfaced in the process. She had also, without quite planning to, started attending council advisory sessions. Not as a formal participant, She sat at the back of the room where she could observe, and when Ciro asked, which he'd started doing carefully and consistently in the evenings, offered her analysis. She was good at it. She was, it turned out, extraordinarily good at it. 20 years of listening from the background of other people's important conversations had given her a political education that no formal schooling could have replicated. You should sit at the table, Ciro said one evening, after she'd identified the strategic error in a border negotiation that 3 advisors had missed. I'm fine where I am, she said. That's not what I meant. He looked at her steadily. You should sit at the table because your analysis is more useful than most of what the table produces. Not as my partner. As yourself. A pause. You're Veilborn. Half the old text treat that as a governing authority in its own right. Not derived from alpha status. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to be my Luna, he said carefully. I'm saying that you have a standing that exists independent of me, and I would like you to use it. She thought about that for a long time. The child's first clear communication came on a Tuesday morning at 8:15. Ilra was in the library when she felt it, not pain, not pressure, but a very specific, very deliberate impression. Like a hand pressed flat against the inside of a window. She set down her book. Hello, she thought. Not aloud. Just inward. The warmth bloomed. Distinct. Pleased. She sat very still. Hand over her stomach, tears absolutely not on her face, except they were, slightly, in a way she chose not to acknowledge until she'd managed to get the feeling under control. Pell told me this would start, she said aloud. To the library, to the child, to whatever veil-born awareness was already present in the life growing inside her. The communication. She said it would feel like this. A flutter of warmth. Recognition. You've already met your father, Ilra said, and was surprised by how naturally the word came. You settled when he told me about the open door. She pressed her hand more firmly. You were right about him. I think. She exhaled slowly. I'm still working on it. The warmth shifted. Amusement, she realized with bewilderment. It was amusing. Don't get smug, she said. You're 3 months along. That evening, Ciro came to the east wing at their established hour. He looked, she noticed, different from the man who'd stood at his study window the night she'd gone to him at 3 a.m. Not dramatically different. The composure was still there, the authority, the fundamental quality of a man built for weight. But something around the edges was different, warmer, less armored. He sat in his usual chair. She handed him tea. He looked at the cup, then at her. The corner of his mouth moved. The child communicated today, she said. He went completely still. Not words. More like, she considered. Presence. Awareness. An impression. She sat across from him. Pell said it would start around this point. The veil-born gift expresses through the bond. What did it feel like, he asked. His voice was very careful. Like something knocking from the inside, she said. Like being told I'm here. I know you. I'm paying attention. She held his gaze. It felt like you, actually. When you're trying to say something that costs you something to say. He looked at his tea. There's something I want to tell you, he said. She waited. The curse. He set the cup down. Pell's last report, the bonding energy measurements she's been tracking, suggests the restoration is complete. Not in progress. Complete. He looked at her. The child's signature is fully stable. Whatever Viola required has been fulfilled. Ilra absorbed this. 3 centuries, she said quietly. 3 centuries, he confirmed. And it broke because... She looked at him. Because you felt something real. Yes. A pause. Because of you. Because of you choosing, she corrected gently. I was the catalyst. But the choice was yours. Every day. She held his gaze. I need you to know I understand the difference. The bond didn't make you feel something. You made yourself available to feel it. Those are not the same thing. He looked at her with that fractured quality behind his composure, the thing she'd come to recognize as his version of openness. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask. Not about politics or the pack, or the child's status, or anything strategic. He set down his cup and laced his hands together, the particular posture she'd identified as him gathering himself. I want to ask you something personal. She waited. The night of the ritual, he said. Before I made the choice to mark you, I watched you adjust the Eastern candle arrangement from across the hall, and I watched you move to the back and position yourself where you'd be invisible, and I thought, he stopped. I thought that I had never in my life seen someone work so hard at not being seen. She said nothing. And I also thought, he continued, that I had never in my life seen someone so clearly necessary to everything around them, so thoroughly the reason everything worked, so fundamentally present, and so completely unrecognized for it. The fire made sounds between them. I told myself the marking was a strategy, he said. The prophecy, the curse, the pact, all the things that were genuinely true about why it needed to happen. He met her eyes. But I've thought about it every day since you've been here. And I know that there was something else. Something I didn't have the self-awareness to name at the time. What? She asked. I think, he said slowly, that some part of me recognized you. Before the mark. Before any of it. He looked at her with absolute steadiness. And I was afraid that if I asked, you would say no, and I would have to walk away from the only person who had ever made my pack feel like mine rather than my responsibility. Illyra sat with this, with the fire and the cold dark outside and the child's warmth inside her already present, already aware, already improbably theirs. That still wasn't a reason to mark me without asking, she said. No, it wasn't. You should have asked. Yes, I should have. If you had asked, she said, and paused for a long moment, I don't know what I would have said. He looked at her. I genuinely don't know, she said. Maybe not. Probably not. At the time, I didn't know what I know now about the bloodline, about the curse, she stopped. About you. She held his gaze. But I think I would have been curious. I think I would have wanted to know more. That's not a yes, he said. No, she agreed. It's not. A pause. I'm asking now, he said quietly. Not to undo anything. It can't be undone, and I won't pretend it can. But I'm asking now. Formally. Not as an alpha to a pack member and not as the father of your child. He looked at her with everything unguarded. Illyra of the Veilborn line. Will you stay? The question sat between them. All the weight of it. The months of difficulty and honesty and something slowly, carefully, incompletely built. The child who already knew his voice and settled when he was present. The mark that had burned itself into her neck without asking and then, slowly, over time, through no one's intention, had begun to feel like something she'd chosen anyway. Not because she forgave him. Not yet, not completely. But because forgiveness was a practice and a direction, not a destination, and she was facing the right way. Provisionally, she said. His expression moved. With conditions that are subject to renegotiation, she continued. And with the full understanding that I am my own person, and my own authority, and you will never again make a decision on my behalf without my explicit agreement. Agreed, he said immediately, and with the further understanding that I'm still angry. I expect to be angry for some time. That doesn't disqualify anything. Agreed. And she stopped herself. I looked at him, at the open-door quality behind his eyes, at the man who'd learned, at 35, to feel something he'd been denied since birth. And I think you should ask me again. Not about staying. Something else. He was quiet. Ask me, she said, what I want. Not what the pack needs, not what the prophecy requires, not what makes strategic sense. She held his gaze. Ask me what I want. He looked at her for a long moment. What do you want, Illyra? He asked. And it was the right question asked in the right tone with the right amount of genuine uncertainty about the answer, not performing not knowing, but actually not knowing, actually yielding control of the outcome to her, and something in her chest answered it before her mouth did. This, she said quietly, whatever this is, however long it takes to know what to call it. She exhaled slowly. I want the evenings, the honest conversations that cost you something, the tea you bring because you noticed, the way you listen, a pause. I want to be seen, not by the pack, by you. He reached across the table, his hand open, palm up, not talking, offering. She looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his. The fire settled. Outside, the pack grounds were quiet under a new fall of snow. The estate, stone and history and all 3 centuries of a curse made visible in the absence it left, held them both. And in the warmth between them, something very small and very new and entirely certain of its own existence pressed its awareness against the present moment and found it good. A week later, the council met for the last time on the matter of the Ashvale heir. Dreas read the formal recognition. The child, not yet born, not yet named, already entirely themselves, was declared the rightful heir to the Ashvale Alpha line with full Valeborn heritage acknowledged and protected. The Ironmore situation had been resolved through regional arbitration, with terms that were fair and final. At the front of the formal hall, Illyra stood beside Sero. Not behind, not to the side in the background space she'd occupied for 20 years. Beside, she was wearing her own dress, her own posture, the crescent mark visible at the back of her neck, the mark that she had not chosen and had chosen and was still in the process of deciding what it meant, which was, she'd come to understand, not a failure of certainty, but an honest engagement with something real. When the council asked if the principals accepted the terms, Sero said yes. Illyra said yes also. And then, because the hall was full of pack members who'd known her for 20 years as flowers and candles and quietly necessary invisibility, and because she felt the child's warmth settle in that particular satisfied way, and because she had always been capable of choosing the right moment from a lifetime of watching other people's important moments from the edges, she reached out and took Sero's hand, not for performance, not for the council or the pack, or the 300-year story that had brought them here, because she wanted to, and it mattered that she wanted to. He looked at her. The alpha composure, present, always present, held. But underneath it, in the quality behind his eyes, was everything the curse had tried to take away and failed. She held his hand. The pack saw, and for the first time in Illyra's life, being seen felt exactly right. Outside the estate, 3 days after the council's final session, snow fell on Ashvale territory in the quiet, unhurried way of winter at peace with itself. In the east wing, Illyra sat at the window desk that had been moved to face the view, moved, she knew now, on his instruction on the first day she'd arrived, because he'd noticed where she looked. She was reading. She was also quietly talking to the child, not aloud. In the Valeborn way, impression and warmth and the old communication that didn't require language. She told the child about Vaila, about a woman who'd been precise in her grief and generous with her conditions and who'd built into a curse the requirement that love had to be real before it could restore what it promised. Who'd decided that the antidote to theft was not punishment, but the genuine version of the thing that had been taken. The child listened. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn around. She already knew. The morning reports are done, Sero said. The council sent formal confirmation of the Ironmore resolution. Good, she said. He sat in the other chair, the one that had been moved to face the window alongside hers. They read in silence for a while. The snow fell. The child settled. And 3 centuries of a wound, finally, carefully, honestly tended, began the long and necessary work of healing. The end.
If Illyra's story moved you, if you felt every moment of the bond she fought for, the choice she made, and the love that had to be earned rather than taken, then you already know what this channel is built for. Stories that make you feel something real. If you're still here at the end of the story, you are exactly the kind of listener we make these for. Drop a comment and tell us, do you think Sero deserved forgiveness? Or did Illyra give in too easily? We genuinely want to know what you think. If this story kept you company today, like it, share it, subscribe so you never miss the next one. The mate bond always finds its way. Sometimes it just needs a little time. Wolf Bond Stories.